In the early 1960s, the space race wasn't just a global competition. It was a high-stakes battle for national pride, ideological dominance, and Cold War superiority. As the United States and Soviet Union each pushed to become the first to conquer the cosmos, public successes were paraded across headlines, while failures were buried in silence. And within that silence lies one of the most compelling space mysteries ever told. While Yuri Gagarin is widely recognized as the first man in space, a growing body of circumstantial evidence, chilling audio recordings, and strange disappearances suggest he may not have been the first human to leave Earth. This is the story of Vladimir Ilyushin, the Soviet cosmonaut who may have launched before Gagarin vanished in space and was quietly erased from history. The name Ilyushin isn't a random fabrication. He was a real person, a decorated Soviet Air Force pilot, test pilot, and son of legendary aircraft designer Sergei Ilyushin. He had the credentials, the experience, and the political clout to be a top candidate for the first manned spaceflight. According to a widely discussed alternate timeline, on April the 7th, 1961, 5 days before Gagarin's launch, Ilyushin boarded a Vostok spacecraft for what was supposed to be the Soviet Union's historic leap into orbit. But something went wrong. Reports claim that during re-entry, his capsule malfunctioned, veered off course, and crash-landed in China. The Chinese military allegedly detained Ilyushin, and his severe injuries prevented him from returning to the spotlight. Embarrassed and unwilling to admit failure, the Soviet regime supposedly buried the mission, wrote it out of their history, and pushed Gagarin's successful flight as the first. But is this just Cold War paranoia, or was Ilyushin's story intentionally erased? There's no shortage of strange details that fuel this theory. Declassified CIA documents from 1961 reference unusual Soviet space activity days before Gagarin's flight. Meanwhile, in Italy, 2 amateur radio operators, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers, intercepted what they claimed were Russian voices from space. One transmission is especially disturbing, a faint, panicked voice in Russian saying, "I see fire. Am I going to crash? I feel hot," followed by silence. These brothers also claimed to have picked up other distress calls over the years, including heartbeats, slowing, breathing, becoming labored, and even a female voice saying she was burning upon re-entry. Soviet officials, of course, denied everything. But multiple Western journalists, defectors, and former Soviet engineers have pointed to inconsistencies in official records, gaps in early cosmonaut training rosters, and odd injuries suffered by Ilyushin that were never adequately explained. The Soviet Union had both the capability and motivation to cover up a failed launch. Space wasn't just science, it was propaganda. A failed first flight, or worse, a death in space, could have shattered Soviet claims to technological superiority and handed the United States a narrative victory. In a regime where truth was tightly controlled, rewriting reality was as easy as redacting a name. Ilyushin, who had once been a public figure, vanished from media appearances around the exact week of Gagarin's mission. When he re-emerged months later, he was limping, pale, and clearly recovering from major trauma. Officially, the story was that he had been in a car crash, but no witnesses ever came forward. No photos of the car, no public explanation, just a clean, convenient narrative. Even more intriguing, Ilyushin was never formally included in the cosmonaut corps again. His once promising future in aerospace vanished. He lived out the rest of his days quietly, becoming an afterthought in a country that once hailed him as a national hero. So what really happened? Was he part of a failed launch? Was he held in China while the Soviets scrambled to replace him with Gagarin? Was he sacrificed in silence so the space race could be won in headlines, if not in truth? We may never know. But the circumstantial evidence keeps piling up. The intercepted transmissions, the missing mission logs, the sudden disappearance and re-emergence of a once-celebrated pilot, and above all, the silence, the deafening, intentional silence. In a system designed to erase mistakes, we must ask, how many others disappeared in pursuit of glory? The Soviet space program, while brilliant in many ways, was also deeply secretive. It's confirmed that they covered up numerous rocket failures, scrubbed images of fallen engineers from photographs, and revised timelines to fit political agendas. It's not hard to believe they could do the same with a man. And if they did it once, who's to say they didn't do it more than once? The lost cosmonaut theory doesn't rest on a single fact. It lives in the gray areas, the gaps in records, the whispered contradictions, the men who never returned home. Vladimir Ilyushin's story may never be proven, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. In fact, it may be one of the most important cautionary tales of the early space age. Not because it changes who was first, but because it reminds us what was sacrificed to get there, and how history, even in space, is written by those in power. The race to space was more than rockets and dreams. It was also secrecy, suppression, and sacrifice. And sometimes, the people who paved the way aren't remembered because they succeeded, but because they were erased.